Cops stopped the wrong bike. 10 minutes later, 25 Marine trucks rolled in, led by a general. An older man rides into a small town on a quiet morning, just him and his vintage Harley. But when two officers pull him over, what starts as a so-called routine stop turns into something far more sinister. They laugh at his ID, humiliate him on the side of the road, and then everything spirals. What no one sees coming is what happens next. Because this wasn't just any man, and this wasn't just any stop. When backup arrives, loud, armed, and unstoppable, the officers realize too late, they made the worst mistake of their lives. But why was he really in that town? What secret set all of this in motion? Before we dive into today's story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Seeing your comments really reminds me why I do this every day. The morning sun cast long shadows across Winston Blackwood's driveway as he secured the last strap on his motorcycle's saddlebag. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, checking each buckle twice, a habit from his Marine Corps days that had never left him. The vintage Harley-Davidson gleamed beneath the early light, its chrome surfaces reflecting the dawn like mirrors. Win paused, his deep-set eyes falling on the small photo tucked into the corner of his motorcycle's windscreen. Rebecca's smile beamed back at him, frozen in time, at 26 years old. That photograph had been taken just 3 months before the accident, 5 years ago today. "I'm coming, baby girl," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Time to set things right." He pulled on his leather riding jacket, the familiar weight settling across his shoulders. At 67, Win still carried himself with military bearing, spine straight and movements deliberate. The silver in his hair caught the sunlight as he secured his helmet. Inside the right saddlebag, beneath his carefully folded clothes, lay a folder containing 5 years' worth of investigation, news clippings, witness statements, and police reports, all pointing to the web of corruption that had allowed Rebecca's killer to walk free. The drunk driver who had run the red light that night had connections to the Cedar Falls Police Department. The breathalyzer results had mysteriously disappeared. Witness statements had been misplaced. Win started the Harley, its deep rumble filling the quiet morning. The sound reminded him of distant thunder, of nights in Afghanistan when he'd led his platoon through impossible situations. That had earned him the Medal of Honor, but no amount of military decorations could fill the void Rebecca's death had left behind. The journey to Cedar Falls would take most of the day. Win had plotted his route with characteristic thoroughness, marking gas stops and rest areas. To anyone watching, he appeared to be just another aging veteran on a memorial ride. They wouldn't see the grief that sat like a stone in his chest, or the quiet determination that had driven him to spend years gathering evidence. As he pulled onto the highway, memories of Rebecca flooded his mind. Her first steps across their living room floor, teaching her to ride a bike in the park, watching proudly as she graduated law school. Each memory was a knife twist in his heart, but he welcomed the pain. It kept him focused on his mission. Mile after mile rolled beneath his wheels. The Texas landscape stretched out around him, vast and unchanging. Win maintained a steady pace, his military discipline evident in the way he handled the big motorcycle. Other riders nodded as they passed, a brotherhood of the road he barely acknowledged. By late afternoon, the familiar signs for Cedar Falls began to appear. Win felt his jaw tighten as he passed the city limits sign. This town, with its neat streets and friendly facades, harbored a darkness few of its citizens suspected. The same corruption that had protected Rebecca's killer had roots that ran deep through the local government. The sun was low in the sky when Win pulled into the parking lot of the Cedar Falls Motor Lodge. He'd chosen it carefully, a modest establishment on the edge of town, where questions weren't asked and guests minded their own business. As he unloaded his bags, his trained eye noticed details others might miss: security cameras, sight lines, multiple exit routes. In his room, Win laid out the contents of his folder on the bed. Newspaper clippings about the accident that claimed Rebecca's life. The official police report, obtained through careful manipulation of his military contacts. Photographs of the intersection where it happened, the skid marks that told a different story than the official version. "Colonel Blackwood?" a voice called from outside. "Your key card isn't working right. Want me to reset it?" Wynn's hand instinctively moved toward the folder. "Just a moment," he called back, quickly gathering the documents and securing them in his bag. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about this didn't feel right. What appeared to be a simple journey of remembrance was actually the beginning of something much larger. Wynn had spent years planning this, gathering evidence, making connections. Now, as he stood in this modest motel room in Cedar Falls, he felt the weight of his true purpose settling around him like armor. He hadn't come just to mourn Rebecca. He'd come to expose the truth, to bring justice to a system that had failed his daughter. What he didn't know was that his carefully planned route was about to intersect with events already in motion, events that would test every skill he'd learned in his military career. Wynn opened the door, his face composed despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. The real work was about to begin, and Colonel Winston Blackwood was ready. Sergeant Dale Pritchard adjusted his radio earpiece. His stocky frame settled comfortably in the driver's seat of his patrol car. Next to him, Officer Tommy Vance fidgeted with his collar, his nervous energy filling the small space between them. They were parked in an alley behind Mason's Hardware, hidden from the main street's morning traffic. "Everything's set for the Veterans Day fundraiser," a crackling voice came through their earpieces. $200,000 in cash donations expected. Security will be minimal. Pritchard's permanent scowl deepened into a satisfied smirk. "Copy that," he responded, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. "We'll make sure the response time is appropriate." Tommy Vance glanced around anxiously, his shifty eyes never quite settling on anything. "What about the extra patrols they requested for the event?" "Already taken care of," Pritchard said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I've got Rodriguez and Martinez assigned to the other side of town. Those two will believe anything if it comes from a superior officer." He chuckled, the sound lacking any real humor. "Besides, they're too busy trying to prove they belong here to question orders." Through the windshield, they watched as volunteers hung red, white, and blue bunting across the community hall's entrance. American flags lined the street, fluttering in the morning breeze. The sight only seemed to deepen Pritchard's scowl. "Look at all these people," he sneered, "falling over themselves to help veterans. Half of them probably aren't even from here originally." The implication in his tone was clear and ugly. Vance nodded eagerly, always quick to mirror his mentor's attitudes. "Yeah, this town's changing too fast, not like it used to be." Several blocks away, Wynn Blackwood guided his Harley down Cedar Falls' main street. The familiar decorations brought back memories of Rebecca. She'd always volunteered at events like these, working tirelessly to help veterans navigate the complex bureaucracy of benefits and support services. He passed the community hall, noting the increased activity around the building. Volunteers carried boxes of supplies inside, while others arranged chairs and tables in the parking lot. The sight of an elderly veteran struggling with a heavy box made Wynn's hands tighten on his handlebars. He wanted to stop and help, but he couldn't risk drawing attention to himself. Not yet. Back in their patrol car, Pritchard and Vance received another transmission. "Crews in position. 4 men, armed. They'll move in during the afternoon crowd rush. Your job is to delay any response calls and control the scene afterward." "Understood," Pritchard replied, then turned to Vance with a stern look. "Remember, rookie, this is how things work here. The right people get protected. The money flows where it should, and everybody wins. Well, everybody who matters." Vance swallowed hard but nodded. He'd crossed too many lines to turn back now. What had started as looking the other way for minor infractions had grown into something much darker. What about witnesses? "People see what we tell them to see," Pritchard said flatly. "Anyone says different, well, their credibility can always be questioned, especially if they're not from around here originally." Wynn pulled into a gas station, watching as more vehicles arrived at the community hall. He recognized some of the license plates, cars belonging to members of the police force he'd been investigating. The same department that had buried evidence in Rebecca's case, that had protected her killer because of his connections. The memory of that night surfaced again. The police report full of inconsistencies, the missing breathalyzer results, the witnesses who had suddenly changed their stories. Rebecca had been building a case against corruption in Cedar Falls when she died. Wynn was certain that wasn't a coincidence. Pritchard's radio crackled again. Be advised, spotted a suspicious motorcycle in the area. Older model Harley, rider, matches the description we discussed. Well, Pritchard straightened in his seat, his expression darkening. Looks like our grieving father finally showed up. Keep eyes on him, but don't engage yet. We've got bigger business today. What if he causes trouble? Vance asked, his hand unconsciously moving to his weapon. Then we deal with him, Pritchard said coldly. One more tragedy in a dangerous world. Happens all the time, especially to people who don't know their place. The Veterans Day preparations continued around them, the community hall growing busier as the morning wore on. American flags snapped in the wind, their shadows dancing across the street like silent warnings. The robbery crew was already inside, blending in with the volunteers, waiting for their moment. Wynn finished fueling his motorcycle, his military-trained senses alert to the patrol car hidden in the alley. He'd expected to be watched, had planned for it. What he hadn't planned for was the growing knot in his stomach, the same feeling he'd had in Afghanistan before missions went sideways. The pieces were all in motion now. The corrupt officers, the hidden robbery crew, the unsuspecting volunteers, and one grieving father carrying 5 years of carefully gathered evidence. The Veterans Day fundraiser would bring them all together, though none of them yet knew exactly how. The patrol car's lights flashed in Wynn's mirrors before the siren gave 2 short bursts. He'd been expecting this, had practically timed it down to the minute based on his research of their patrol patterns. With practiced calm, he signaled and pulled his Harley to the curb. Through his mirrors, Wynn watched Sergeant Pritchard and Officer Vance emerge from their vehicle. Their approach followed standard procedure, but something was off. Both officers wore earpieces, unusual for a routine traffic stop. Wynn's years of military experience had taught him to notice such details. "License and registration," Pritchard demanded, standing slightly behind Wynn's left shoulder. His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon, another red flag for what should have been a simple stop. "Of course, officer." Wynn kept his movements slow and deliberate as he reached for his wallet. The morning sun caught his silver hair as he turned, highlighting the deep lines of experience on his face. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" Vance shifted his weight from foot to foot, eyes darting between Wynn and the surrounding streets. "You were speeding back there," he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Wynn had been precisely at the limit, just as he'd planned. "I see." Wynn handed over his documents, including his military ID. He noticed Pritchard's scowl deepen as he examined them. "This military ID looks suspicious," Pritchard said, though the ID was clearly authentic. "Step away from the motorcycle, sir." The last word came out like an insult. Wynn recognized the escalation tactic. They were buying time. But for what? He carefully swung his leg over the bike, maintaining his calm demeanor. "The ID is genuine, Sergeant. I'm a retired Marine colonel." "Sure you are," Pritchard sneered, his contempt barely concealed. "And I'm the Secretary of Defense. Hands where I can see them." Through his peripheral vision, Wynn noticed increased activity near the community hall. Men who didn't quite fit in with the volunteers were moving with purpose. The pieces clicked into place. The traffic stop wasn't about him at all. He was just a convenient distraction. "Is there a problem with my documents, Sergeant Pritchard?" Wynn asked, deliberately using the officer's name, letting him know he'd done his homework. Pritchard's expression darkened. Hands on the hood of the patrol car. "Now." His voice carried the artificial authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Wynn complied, his movements measured and precise. He could feel the tension radiating from Officer Vance, who kept glancing at his senior partner for cues. The younger officer's hand trembled slightly near his weapon. "Spread your legs," Pritchard ordered, moving closer. "Wider." His boot nudged Wynn's feet apart with unnecessary force. Through the reflection in the patrol car's window, Wynn caught a glimpse of Pritchard touching his earpiece, listening intently. The sergeant's face showed satisfaction at whatever he heard. "This military ID," Pritchard said, holding up the card, "is obviously fake. No way someone like you made Colonel." The racism in his tone was unmistakable. "You can verify my service record with one phone call," Wynn replied evenly, maintaining his composure despite the insult. His daughter's voice echoed in his memory, telling him about the department's history of racial profiling and abuse of power. "Oh, we'll do more than that," Pritchard said, producing his handcuffs. "We're going to take a trip to the station to sort this out." Wynn remained still, his mind racing through scenarios. The traffic stop had already lasted 7 minutes, longer than standard procedure dictated. Combined with the earpieces, the suspicious activity at the community hall, and the officer's aggressive escalation, it painted a clear picture. "Is this how you usually handle traffic violations, Sergeant?" Wynn asked, his deep voice carrying just enough edge to make Vance nervous. "Keep your mouth shut," Pritchard snapped, but Wynn caught him checking his watch. They were stalling, waiting for something specific to happen. A burst of static came through their earpieces, and both officers tensed momentarily. Wynn's military training kicked in, reading their subtle reactions. Whatever operation they were part of was proceeding according to plan. "Tommy," Pritchard said to his partner, "radio in and check on that military ID. I want every detail verified." It was another delay tactic. They had no intention of actually running his identification. Officer Vance moved toward their patrol car, his movements betraying his unease with the situation. Wynn noticed the young officer's hand shaking as he reached for the radio mic. The morning traffic continued to flow around them, drivers slowing to stare at the scene. Wynn stood perfectly still, his military bearing evident despite his position against the patrol car. He'd faced worse situations in Afghanistan, had led his platoon through ambushes and firefights. This was just another tactical puzzle to solve. Pritchard moved closer, his breath hot against Wynn's ear. "You picked the wrong town to cause trouble in, old man. Things work differently here." Wynn didn't respond, but his eyes tracked the movement around the community hall in the patrol car's reflection. The pieces were all there. The earpieces, the prolonged stop, the suspicious activity at the fundraiser. This wasn't about a traffic violation. It was about keeping potential witnesses occupied while something bigger unfolded. "I'm going to check your saddlebags," Pritchard announced, moving toward Wynn's Harley. "Probably full of drugs, knowing your type." Wynn's jaw tightened. "Sergeant, you have no probable cause for a search. I do not consent." "Shut up!" Pritchard barked, roughly yanking open the first saddlebag. "Your kind always have something to hide." He started pulling out Wynn's carefully packed belongings, tossing them carelessly onto the street. Wynn watched his spare clothes scatter across the pavement, keeping his hands planted firmly on the patrol car's hood. His military training helped him maintain his composure, but anger simmered beneath the surface. "Look what we have here," Pritchard said, holding up Wynn's laptop. "Probably stolen." "That's my personal property," Wynn stated firmly, "and you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights." Vance stepped closer, his hand now resting on his holstered weapon. "You some kind of lawyer now?" The young officer's voice cracked slightly, betraying his nervousness. "I'm a retired Marine colonel who knows his rights," Wynn replied evenly, "and everything you're doing is being recorded." Pritchard spun around, his face twisted with rage. Is that a threat? He stormed back to Wynn, getting so close that Wynn could smell coffee on his breath. "You threatening a police officer?" "Simply stating a fact," Wynn said, maintaining eye contact. He noticed Pritchard's hand tightening on his baton. "Get on your knees," Vance suddenly shouted. drawing his weapon. His hands shook as he pointed it at Wynne. "Do it now." Wynne slowly turned his head toward the community hall. Smoke was rising from the back of the building, dark and thick against the morning sky. "Officers, there's a situation developing at the Veterans Day fundraiser." "Face down, on the ground." Vance's voice rose higher, almost cracking. "Don't try to distract us." "This isn't about me," Wynne said calmly, beginning to lower himself to his knees. "There's smoke coming from the community hall. People could be in danger." Pritchard grabbed Wynne's shoulder roughly. "I said shut up. You're trying to interfere with police business?" As Wynne's knees touched the pavement, he caught more movement near the community hall. Men in dark clothing were rushing out the back entrance. The smoke was getting thicker. "Listen to me," Wynne tried again. "Whatever's happening at that fundraiser, it's turning violent. You need to—" Pritchard's baton struck Wynne's back, cutting off his words. "Stay down and keep your mouth shut." Wynne absorbed the pain without making a sound, his mind racing through options. The beacon in his saddlebag was his last resort. He'd hoped to avoid involving his former unit, but these corrupt officers were leaving him no choice. "Tommy, cuff him," Pritchard ordered, keeping his baton pressed against Wynne's back. "I'm going to finish searching his stuff." As Vance holstered his weapon and reached for his handcuffs, Wynne spoke again. "Officer Vance, look at the community hall. Really look. Is this what you signed up for?" "I said shut up." Pritchard swung his baton again, but Wynne had tensed his muscles, prepared for the impact. Through the pain, Wynne watched Pritchard return to the motorcycle. The sergeant's rough handling of the saddlebag was about to give Wynne exactly what he needed. "Nothing but junk," Pritchard muttered, dumping out the remaining contents. "Where's the drugs, old man?" The beacon tumbled onto the pavement along with Wynne's other belongings. From his position on the ground, Wynne could see its small red light was already blinking. Pritchard's violent searching had accidentally activated it. Wynne allowed himself a small smile, despite the situation. Sometimes the best plans were the ones that looked like accidents. The beacon would transmit his location to his former unit, who were already staged nearby, waiting for exactly this signal. "What's so funny?" Vance demanded, roughly pulling Wynne's arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place too tight, biting into his wrists. "Nothing, officer," Wynne replied calmly. "Just remembering something my daughter used to say about justice always finding a way." Pritchard kicked Wynne's scattered belongings closer to him. "Your daughter must be real proud, having a father like you." The words were meant to hurt, but Wynne felt a deep sense of peace. Rebecca would understand what he was doing. She had died trying to expose corruption in this department, and now he was finishing her work. The smoke from the community hall was visible to everyone now, but the corrupt officers were too focused on Wynne to notice or care. Their earpieces crackled with activity they tried to hide, but Wynne's trained ear caught fragments of panicked voices. As Vance pulled him to his feet, Wynne took one last look at the beacon lying among his scattered belongings. Its steady red blink was a promise of what was to come. Help was already on the way, not just for him, but for everyone these corrupt officers had wronged. The sound of distant sirens began to fill the air. But Wynne knew they weren't coming for the robbery at the community hall. These sirens were heading in the wrong direction, part of the larger distraction he'd uncovered in his investigation. "Time for a trip to the station," Pritchard said, roughly grabbing Wynne's arm. "We'll see how tough you are after a few hours in a cell." Wynne remained silent, watching the beacon continue its steady signal. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, though not quite in the order he'd expected. Sometimes, he reflected, the best strategy was simply to let your opponents create their own downfall. At Fort Braxton, General Marcus Rivera stood at his office window, gazing across the sprawling military base. His morning routine was interrupted by an urgent alert from his computer, an emergency beacon signal he hadn't expected to see again. The general's breath caught as he recognized the unique signature. "Blackwood," he whispered, quickly moving to his desk. His fingers flew across the keyboard, confirming what he already knew in his gut. This was Wynn's emergency beacon, the same type they'd used in Afghanistan. Rivera's mind flashed back to that scorching day in Kandahar province. Lieutenant Rivera had been pinned down with his platoon, surrounded by enemy forces, when Colonel Blackwood led the rescue mission. Despite heavy fire, Wynn had maneuvered their entire unit to safety, taking a bullet in the process, but never stopping until every soldier was secure. "Sir?" His aide appeared in the doorway. "We're picking up an emergency signal from Cedar Falls." "I know exactly whose signal that is," Rivera said, his voice tight with concern. "Colonel Winston Blackwood, he saved my life and our entire platoon in Afghanistan. If he's activated that beacon, he's in serious trouble." Rivera grabbed his phone, muscle memory taking over as he dialed the base's rapid response command. "This is General Rivera. I'm ordering immediate mobilization of the 1st Marine Division Quick Reaction Force, full convoy, combat ready. We have a Medal of Honor recipient under potential enemy attack in Cedar Falls." He paused, listening to the response. "No, this is not a drill. Colonel Blackwood wouldn't activate that beacon unless the situation was critical. I want those Marines rolling in 5 minutes." The general's mind raced through possibilities as he strapped on his sidearm and grabbed his jacket. Wynn had mentioned investigating police corruption in Cedar Falls, but Rivera hadn't expected it to escalate to this level. Whatever was happening, Wynn needed backup, and Rivera wasn't about to let his former commanding officer down. "Sir?" his aide called after him as he strode toward the door. "Should we notify local law enforcement?" Rivera stopped short. "Negative. We don't know who we can trust. Colonel Blackwood's investigation suggested corruption throughout their department. We go in dark, full tactical approach." As Rivera hurried toward the motor pool, the base erupted into organized chaos. Marines rushed to their vehicles, weapons were distributed, and communications channels crackled with activity. The general felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the same feeling he'd had when Wynn led them into battle. "I need real-time satellite coverage of Cedar Falls," he barked into his radio. "Focus on any police activity or disturbances, and get me a direct line to the governor's office. We're about to enter their jurisdiction in force. They need to know why." The convoy assembled with impressive speed. Armored vehicles, troop transports, and medical support units. Rivera climbed into the lead vehicle, his jaw set with determination. The beacon's coordinates showed Wynn was on the main road into Cedar Falls, stationary for too long to be normal. "Listen up," Rivera addressed the assembled Marines through the command channel. "Our mission is to extract Colonel Winston Blackwood, Medal of Honor recipient, and one of the finest Marines I've ever served with. He's activated an emergency beacon, which means he's in serious danger. We move fast, we move smart, and we bring him home." The convoy roared to life, rolling out of Fort Braxton with practiced precision. Rivera studied the tactical display, watching Wynn's beacon signal remain frustratingly static. Whatever was happening in Cedar Falls, they were still 20 minutes out. "Hang on, Colonel," Rivera muttered, remembering how Wynn had refused to leave him behind when he was wounded in Afghanistan. "We're coming for you." The general's radio crackled. "Sir, satellite feed shows smoke rising from the Cedar Falls Community Hall. Multiple police units are responding, but they're heading in the opposite direction from Colonel Blackwood's position." Rivera's eyes narrowed. This was starting to smell like a coordinated operation, one designed to keep law enforcement away from whatever was happening at Wynn's location. He'd seen similar tactics in combat zones, and it only heightened his concern. "Increase speed," he ordered, "and get our air support in position. I want eyes on that situation before we arrive." As the convoy thundered down the highway, Rivera couldn't shake the memory of Wynn standing over him in Afghanistan, returning fire while applying pressure to his wound. "Leave no one behind," Wynn had said that day, and he'd meant it. Now it was Rivera's turn to live up to those words. The tactical display updated with new satellite imagery, showing 2 police cruisers and multiple officers around what appeared to be a motorcycle. Rivera's hands tightened on his seat restraints. Wynn was there, alone, facing an unknown threat, but not for much longer. 10 minutes out, the driver announced. Rivera nodded grimly. Colonel Blackwood taught me that loyalty goes both ways, he said to no one in particular. Time to prove I was paying attention. The convoy pressed on toward Cedar Falls, dust billowing in their wake, while Rivera silently prayed they wouldn't be too late. Wynn had never left anyone behind, and neither would he. Wynn's eyes darted between the aggressive officers and the growing plume of smoke rising from the community hall. His military training screamed that something was terribly wrong. People could be in danger, trapped, or worse. He couldn't stand by while others needed help. Officers, Wynn said calmly, keeping his hands visible. There's smoke coming from the community hall. People might need assistance. We should... Shut your mouth, Pritchard snarled, his hand resting on his taser. You don't give orders here. Wynn took a careful step toward his motorcycle, hoping to reason with them. Lives could be at stake. Just look at the smoke. I said don't move. Pritchard's face twisted with rage. He unholstered his taser, aiming it at Wynn's chest. I'm not resisting, Wynn said steadily, his hands still raised. I'm trying to help those people. He took another measured step toward his bike, intending to radio for emergency services. Pritchard's response was immediate and brutal. The taser barbs struck Wynn's chest, sending 50,000 volts of electricity through his body. His muscles seized as white-hot pain exploded through him. Wynn's legs gave out, and he crashed hard onto the asphalt. Through the haze of pain, Wynn's military training kicked in. He focused on his breathing, fighting to stay conscious as his body convulsed. The rough pavement scraped against his cheek, but he kept his eyes open, refusing to give in to the darkness threatening to overtake him. Not so tough now, are you? Pritchard laughed, standing over Wynn's twitching form. Should have stayed in your own neighborhood, old man. Officer Vance joined in, his boot pressing against Wynn's shoulder. Got a whole list of charges lined up for you. Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer. Might even find some drugs in those saddlebags. Wynn's jaw clenched against the pain, but his mind remained sharp. He cataloged their threats, memorizing their words even as his body struggled to recover from the taser's impact. The smoke from the community hall had grown thicker, and he could hear distant sirens, but they were moving away from the hall, not toward it. Look at him squirm, Pritchard sneered, using degrading racial slurs that made Vance chuckle. Bet you wish you'd stayed home today, don't you? Wynn focused on his tactical breathing. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The same technique he'd taught his Marines during combat stress. The taser's effects were beginning to fade, but he remained still, gathering his strength while assessing the situation. Through partly closed eyes, he watched Pritchard and Vance exchange knowing looks as they monitored their earpieces. Their attention kept shifting toward the community hall, confirming Wynn's suspicions about their involvement in whatever was happening there. Should we cuff him? Vance asked, pressing his boot harder into Wynn's shoulder. Pritchard shook his head, touching his earpiece. Nah, keep him down. We just need another few minutes. He kicked Wynn's side hard enough to draw a grunt of pain. Besides, I'm enjoying the view of a troublemaker learning his place. Wynn endured their abuse silently, his military discipline holding firm. He'd survived worse in combat, and his concern remained focused on the community hall. The smoke pattern had changed. It was darker now, suggesting the fire was growing. He could hear screams in the distance, barely audible over the officers taunting. Getting some fight back in you? Pritchard noticed Wynn's subtle movements and raised his taser again. Maybe you need another lesson in respect. Wynn's muscles still twitched from the first shock, but his mind remained clear. He tracked the officers' positions, noted their weapons, and monitored the increasing activity around the community hall. Years of combat experience had taught him to stay aware even while appearing helpless. Got a nice long list of priors we're going to find on you, Vance taunted, reading from an imaginary list. Drunk and disorderly, drug possession, resisting arrest. Might even find you've got some outstanding warrants. The pain in Wynn's chest was intense, but it wasn't the physical abuse that cut deepest. It was watching these corrupt officers abuse their authority, while people potentially died in the community hall. The same kind of corruption that had let his daughter's killer walk free. Through it all, Wynn maintained his composure, his training serving him well. He kept his breathing steady, his muscles ready, despite the lingering effects of the taser. His emergency beacon was still active in his saddlebag, and he knew help would come. But his heart ached for those who might be trapped in the community hall, facing dangers these officers were deliberately ignoring. The smoke continued to billow into the clear Texas sky, a dark testament to the corruption playing out on this quiet street. Wynn remained on the ground, his body still recovering, but his spirit unbroken. He'd faced worse odds in Afghanistan, and he'd survived. He would survive this too, and more importantly, he would make sure justice was served, not just for himself, but for everyone these corrupt officers had wronged. The ground began to vibrate. At first, it was just a subtle tremor, but it quickly grew into a thunderous rumble that echoed through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls. Wynn, still fighting the effects of the taser, felt the familiar vibration through the asphalt, the unmistakable approach of a military convoy. Pritchard and Vance exchanged confused looks as the sound grew louder. "What the hell is that?" Pritchard demanded, his hand tightening on his weapon. The answer came in an overwhelming display of force. 25 military vehicles rounded the corner in perfect formation. Massive armored Humvees, transport trucks, and tactical vehicles, their engines roaring in unison. The convoy moved with precision, quickly surrounding the scene in a coordinated pattern that left no escape route uncovered. The corrupt officers stood frozen, their faces draining of color as Marines in full combat gear emerged from the vehicles, taking up tactical positions. The display of military might was absolute and intentional, designed to shock and overwhelm. What is this?" Vance stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating as he stepped back from Wynn's prone form. A pristine military command vehicle pulled up directly in front of them. The door opened, and General Marcus Rivera stepped out, his uniform immaculate, his presence commanding immediate attention. His eyes swept the scene, quickly assessing the situation before landing on Wynn's form on the ground. "Colonel Blackwood!" Rivera rushed forward, kneeling beside his former commanding officer. The concern on his face was genuine, born from years of shared combat experience and deep respect. "Get a medic here now," he barked, and 2 Marines immediately responded, medical kits in hand. Wynn managed a weak smile, his voice rough. "Marcus, good timing as always?" Rivera's expression hardened as he turned to face the officers, who had backed away several steps. "Who's responsible for this?" His voice carried the weight of his rank and authority, making both officers flinch. "Sir, this was a routine traffic stop," Pritchard tried to explain, his earlier confidence replaced by growing fear. "The suspect was resisting." "The suspect?" Rivera cut him off, his voice sharp enough to slice steel. "That man on the ground is retired Marine Colonel Winston Blackwood, Medal of Honor recipient and one of the finest officers I've ever served under." He stepped closer to Pritchard, his presence towering. "He saved my life and our entire platoon in Afghanistan, and you just assaulted him." The medics worked quickly to remove the taser barbs from Wynn's chest and assess his condition. Wynn remained alert, his military training helping him focus through the pain as he watched the scene unfold. We didn't know," Vance stammered, his hand shaking as he tried to holster his weapon. "General," one of the Marines called out, "we found communication equipment in their patrol car. Non-standard issue, multiple frequencies." Rivera nodded grimly. "Secure everything, full documentation." He turned back to the officers, whose faces had gone ashen. "You're going to want to explain why you're carrying unauthorized communication equipment while assaulting a decorated Marine colonel." The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, securing the area and gathering evidence. Several teams broke off toward the community hall, responding to the smoke that still rose in the distance. The scale of the military response was overwhelming, transforming the quiet street into something resembling a combat operation. "Sir," Wynne spoke up from where the medics were treating him. "The community hall? There's a situation?" "Already on it, Colonel," Rivera assured him. "We've got teams moving in now." He turned to a nearby officer. "Get me a full situation report on that fire and check for any civilian casualties." Pritchard and Vance stood rooted in place, watching their carefully constructed world crumble around them. Their earpieces had gone silent, their corrupt network abandoning them in the face of unexpected military intervention. "You have no jurisdiction here," Pritchard tried one last time, his voice weak and uncertain. Rivera's laugh was cold and without humor. "You assaulted a Marine colonel on Veterans Day. You're lucky I don't have this entire town locked down." He gestured to several Marines who moved forward with restraints. "But don't worry about jurisdiction. We'll sort that out with the FBI task force that's on their way." The medics helped Wynne to his feet, supporting him as he regained his balance. Despite his injuries, he stood tall, his military bearing evident in his posture. The sight seemed to further deflate the corrupt officers, who finally began to grasp the magnitude of their mistake. "General," Wynne said, his voice stronger now, "there's more here than just these two. The network dash dot." "We'll get them all, sir," Rivera assured him, his respect evident in his tone. "Your beacon activated a pre-planned response. We've had teams tracking their communication since you entered the city limits. Nobody's getting away this time." The corrupt officers could only watch as their weapons and badges were confiscated, their hands secured behind their backs. The overwhelming show of force had transformed their arrogant confidence into palpable fear, their world of corruption and power crumbling in the face of true authority and honor. General Rivera stood at his full height, his uniform catching the late afternoon sun as he addressed the gathered Marines and the two detained officers. The fury in his eyes was barely contained, tempered only by years of military discipline. "Let me tell you exactly who you've assaulted today," Rivera announced, his voice carrying across the secured perimeter. "Colonel Winston Blackwood isn't just any retired Marine. He's a legend in our Corps, and the reason I'm standing here today..." Wynne tried to wave off the praise, but Rivera continued, his voice thick with emotion. 10 years ago, in the mountains of Afghanistan, our platoon was pinned down by enemy fire. We were outnumbered, running low on ammunition, and had 3 critically wounded Marines. He paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. "I was one of those wounded, bleeding out from a sniper's bullet." The corrupt officers shifted uncomfortably in their restraints as Rivera moved closer, his words precise and measured. "Colonel Blackwood, despite being wounded himself, organized a counter-assault that not only saved our entire platoon, but also secured the strategic position we were defending. He carried me on his back through heavy fire to reach the evacuation point." A burst of gunfire echoed from the direction of the community hall, causing everyone to turn. Wynne immediately tried to stand straighter, his military instincts kicking in despite the lingering effects of the taser. "General," Wynne interjected, his voice steady despite his pain, "we need to address the situation at the hall. There are civilians in danger." Rivera nodded, impressed, but not surprised by his former commander's focus on the current crisis. He turned to a nearby Marine captain. "Status report on the hall situation?" "Sir, our teams have the building surrounded. Hostage situation confirmed. 4 armed suspects inside with approximately 20 civilian hostages. They're cornered and getting desperate." Wynne's face tightened with concern. "These are the same criminals these officers were coordinating with?" he said, gesturing toward Pritchard and Vance. "They were using this traffic stop to delay any response to the robbery." Rivera's expression darkened further as he turned back to the detained officers. "And that brings us to the Medal of Honor." He pulled out his phone, quickly bringing up an image. This ceremony at the White House, the president himself presenting Colonel Blackwood with our nation's highest military decoration for his actions that day in Afghanistan. The Marines standing guard straightened even further at the mention of the Medal of Honor, their respect for Wynne visibly intensifying. Pritchard and Vance seemed to shrink into themselves, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. "You didn't just assault a retired Marine," Rivera continued, his voice carrying a deadly calm. "You attacked a Medal of Honor recipient, a man who saved countless lives, a leader who's inspired generations of Marines." He stepped closer to the officers, his presence overwhelming. "And you did it while actively participating in an armed robbery that's putting innocent lives at risk." Another burst of gunfire from the community hall punctuated his words. Wynne pushed away from the medics supporting him, his voice carrying the natural authority that had earned him such respect during his service. "Marcus," he said, using Rivera's first name for the first time since the convoy's arrival, "we need to focus on the civilians. These two can wait." Rivera's expression softened slightly as he looked at his former commander. The same leadership that had saved their platoon was evident in Wynne's voice, pushing aside personal concerns to protect others. Their shared combat experience created an unspoken understanding that transcended their current ranks. "Of course, sir," Rivera replied, unconsciously falling back into the habit of addressing Wynne as his superior officer. He turned to his command team. "I want tactical teams ready for breach on my mark. Get me a direct line to the suspects inside." Wynne stepped forward, still slightly unsteady but growing stronger. "They'll be monitoring police frequencies. That's why they had these two running interference." He nodded toward the detained officers. "But they won't be prepared for military intervention." Rivera smiled grimly, recognizing the strategic mind that had saved their platoon coming into play. "Just like Kandahar, sir? They never saw us coming there either." "Similar principle," Wynne agreed, his tactical experience evident in his calm assessment. "They're expecting local law enforcement, not Marines. We can use that surprise to our advantage." The bond between the two Marines was clear to everyone watching, a connection forged in combat and strengthened by mutual respect. Rivera's protective fury toward his former commander had transformed into focused determination as they tackled the current crisis together. "Sir," Rivera said to Wynne, "I know you want to help, but you need medical attention. Let us handle this." Wynne straightened his back, pushing aside his discomfort. "Those people in there need help. I'm not standing down while civilians are in danger." Rivera recognized the familiar determination in Wynne's eyes, the same look he'd seen in Afghanistan when their platoon needed saving. He knew there would be no talking his former commander out of helping, injured or not. More gunfire erupted from the community hall, followed by the sound of breaking glass. The situation was escalating, demanding immediate attention. The two Marines shared a look of understanding, years of combat experience allowing them to communicate without words. The corrupt officers watched helplessly as their simple plan to assist a robbery had transformed into a military operation led by two decorated Marines. Their mistake in targeting Wynne had not only exposed their corruption, but had brought the full force of the Marine Corps down on their criminal enterprise. Another explosion of gunfire shattered the evening air, followed by screams from inside the community hall. Wynne's head snapped toward the sound, his military training overriding the lingering pain from the taser attack. He took a steadying breath and stepped forward. "General, we need to move now. Those civilians don't have time for us to wait for SWAT or negotiators," Wynne said, his voice carrying the natural authority of a combat commander. Rivera shook his head, concern evident on his face. "Sir, you've just been assaulted. You need medical attention. Let my teams handle this." Wynne straightened his spine, pushing aside his discomfort. "Marcus, you remember what I taught you in Afghanistan? Marines never leave anyone behind." His eyes locked with Rivera's. "Those people in there? They're our responsibility now." Rivera's expression softened as the familiar words hit home. He'd heard Wynne say those exact words before pulling him to safety under heavy fire. The memory of that day, of Wynn's unwavering determination to save every member of their platoon, was still vivid in his mind. "You're right, sir," Rivera conceded, recognizing the same fire in Wynn's eyes that he'd seen that day in the mountains. "But you're not going in alone. We do this together." Wynn nodded, already moving toward the command vehicle. His movements were deliberate and focused, each step more stable than the last, as his military bearing reasserted itself. The transformation was remarkable, the victim of police brutality melting away as the decorated Marine colonel emerged. "We need building plans," Wynn said, spreading out a tactical map on the hood of the vehicle. Marines gathered around, their respect evident as they watched their general defer to this retired colonel's expertise. The community hall has 4 entry points: main entrance, kitchen delivery door, fire exit, and the roof access. Rivera leaned in, pointing to the rear of the building. "My teams are reporting movement near the kitchen. Looks like they're trying to establish an escape route." Wynn's tactical mind processed the information quickly. "They'll expect police to establish a standard perimeter. We can use that assumption against them." His finger traced a path on the map. "Your men in desert camo will stand out against the building. We need to use the gathering darkness to our advantage." The corrupt officers, Pritchard and Vance, McCurshan and Vance, watched from their restraints as their simple traffic stop transformed into a full military operation. Their faces showed growing horror as they realized how completely their plan had unraveled. "First team takes the roof," Wynn continued, his voice strong and clear. "Second team covers the delivery entrance. Third team—" He paused as more gunfire erupted. "Third team with us through the main entrance. Fast and coordinated, just like Kandahar." Rivera smiled grimly at the reference. "That was one hell of a mission, sir." "This one's more important," Wynn replied, his expression serious. "These aren't combatants in there. They're civilians who came to support veterans." His jaw tightened. "And these criminals chose Veterans Day to target them." The Marines around them straightened at his words, their determination visibly intensifying. Wynn had always had this effect on his men, the ability to remind them of the deeper meaning behind their missions, to connect their tactical objectives to their core values as Marines. "Teams, move into position," Rivera ordered, then turned to Wynn. "You sure you're up for this, sir?" Wynn checked the tactical vest a Marine had handed him, adjusting the straps with practiced efficiency. "Those people in there need our help, Marcus. Everything else is secondary." Rivera nodded, recognizing that nothing would stop his former commander from protecting civilians in danger. It was this same dedication that had earned Wynn his Medal of Honor, this unwavering commitment to saving others regardless of personal cost. "Marines, ready positions," Wynn commanded, his voice carrying across the gathering darkness. The response was immediate. Dozens of highly trained soldiers moving with coordinated precision, taking up their assigned positions around the building. From their spot near the police cruiser, Pritchard and Vance watched in stunned silence as their routine abuse of power transformed into something far beyond their control. Their criminal associates inside the community hall had no idea they were about to face not local law enforcement, but a Marine tactical operation led by a Medal of Honor recipient. Wynn moved forward with Rivera at his side, their shared combat experience allowing them to communicate with just glances and subtle gestures. The pain from the taser attack was still there, but Wynn pushed it aside, focused entirely on the mission ahead. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about the innocent people trapped inside, counting on help to arrive. "All teams report ready," Rivera called over the secure radio channel. One by one, the team leaders responded, their positions secured, their units prepared for coordinated action. Wynn listened to each confirmation, his tactical mind already plotting out the next series of moves, just as he had done countless times in combat. "Sir," Rivera said quietly, "just like old times?" Wynn checked his vest one final time, his movements precise and controlled. "Just like old times, Marcus. But this time, we're not just saving our own. We're saving civilians who came to honor veterans. The weight of that responsibility settled over both men as they took their positions, ready to lead their Marines into action. The transformation was complete. Wynn was no longer the victim of police corruption, but once again the decorated Marine colonel, ready to risk everything to save others. Wynn raised his hand, signaling the teams to hold position. Through the community hall's windows, shadows moved in erratic patterns, suggesting multiple armed suspects. The hostages appeared to be gathered in the main area, visible only as huddled shapes in the dim evening light. Team 1, roof access secured, crackled the radio. Team 2 in position at delivery entrance, followed another voice. Wynn glanced at Rivera, who nodded in silent understanding. Years of combat experience flowed between them, making words unnecessary. Wynn lifted his radio and spoke in a calm, measured tone. All teams, execute on my mark. Remember, civilian safety is priority 1. Team 1, flashbang through skylight on my signal. Team 2, block the kitchen exit. Team 3, we breach main entrance immediately after the flashbang. The Marines moved with practiced precision, their training evident in every controlled movement. Wynn watched the windows intently, tracking the suspect's movements. When one of the armed men moved away from the hostages, he saw his opportunity. Execute, Wynn commanded. The skylight shattered as 2 flashbang grenades dropped into the main hall. The deafening bang and brilliant flash disoriented the suspects, giving the Marines their crucial advantage. Wynn and Rivera led Team 3 through the main entrance, their movements swift and coordinated. United States Marines, drop your weapons! Wynn's voice boomed through the chaos. The robbery crew, still stunned by the flashbangs, found themselves surrounded by highly trained Marines. 2 suspects immediately dropped their weapons, while a third tried to run toward the kitchen only to find Team 2 blocking his escape. Clear the corners, Wynn ordered, his tactical awareness never wavering. Secure the suspects and check the hostages. Rivera moved alongside Wynn, covering his flank just as he had done in Afghanistan. Together, they approached the final suspect, who held a pistol in shaking hands. It's over, Wynn said firmly. Put it down. No one else needs to get hurt today. The suspect's eyes darted between Wynn and the Marines surrounding him. After a tense moment, the gun clattered to the floor. Marines immediately moved in to secure him, while others began helping the frightened hostages. Building secure, Rivera announced. All suspects in custody, all hostages safe. Wynn surveyed the scene, noting how smoothly the operation had unfolded. The younger Marines moved with precision and purpose, their actions reflecting the training and discipline that had been Wynn's hallmark during his active service. Sir, a young Marine approached. The hostages are all accounted for. No serious injuries. Wynn nodded, relief visible on his face. Good work, Marine. Get medical teams in here for checkups, just to be safe. As the situation stabilized, Rivera gathered the unit leaders for a quick debrief. The admiration in their eyes as they looked at Wynn was unmistakable. They had just witnessed firsthand why he had earned the Medal of Honor. Colonel Blackwood's tactical plan was perfect, one sergeant said. Just like they teach us about the Kandahar operation. Wynn turned to the sergeant. The plan worked because every Marine did their job exactly as trained. That's what makes the difference. Not one person's plan, but everyone working together. The first suspect began talking almost immediately after being secured. It was supposed to be simple, he said, his voice shaky. The cops said they'd keep the area clear. Pritchard and Vance were supposed to handle any problems. Rivera's eyes narrowed. Get FBI investigators here now. We're going to need detailed statements about every police officer involved in this operation. Wynn watched as the suspect continued providing names and details, the criminal network unraveling with each revelation. His strategic patience had paid off. What started as an investigation into his daughter's case was now exposing a broader web of corruption. Sir, a young Marine approached Wynn, standing at attention. The way you handled this situation, it was an honor to see you in action. The stories about your leadership don't do it justice." Wynn placed a hand on the Marine's shoulder. "The honor was serving alongside Marines like you today. You all proved why our motto, Semper Fidelis, means so much." As the FBI arrived to begin their investigation, Wynn and Rivera stood watching the suspects being processed. The evidence they were providing would reach far beyond this failed robbery, touching police departments and criminal organizations across the region. "Just like old times," Rivera said quietly. "Except this time, we're fighting a different kind of enemy." Wynn nodded, his expression serious. "Corruption destroys everything it touches, Marcus. But today we showed that it can be beaten when good people stand together." The community hall, which had been meant to host a Veterans Day celebration, now stood as a testament to the continuing service of Marines like Wynn and Rivera. The successful operation had not only saved lives, but had also demonstrated that Wynn's legendary status was well earned, his tactical brilliance and leadership still inspiring a new generation of Marines. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen spread the case files across the conference room table at the Cedar Falls Police Department. The evidence collected from the arrested robbery crew had opened a floodgate of information revealing connections that stretched back years. "Colonel Blackwood," Agent Chen said, "your anonymous tip about the Veterans Day robbery wasn't just lucky timing, was it?" Wynn sat quietly for a moment, his weathered hands folded on the table. "No, it wasn't. I've spent the last 18 months tracking the corruption network that protected my daughter's killer." General Rivera, sitting beside Wynn, leaned forward. "You planned this whole operation, didn't you?" Wynn nodded, pulling out a worn leather notebook from his jacket. "After Rebecca's death, I couldn't accept the official story. A drunk driver walks away without charges because evidence disappeared? It didn't add up." Agent Chen opened another file. "Sergeant Pritchard's name keeps coming up in our investigation. He was directly involved in your daughter's case." "Yes?" Wynn confirmed, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "Pritchard was the officer who made the breathalyzer results vanish that night. The same pattern repeated in dozens of other cases. Evidence disappearing, witnesses changing statements, charges being dropped." Wynn opened his notebook, revealing meticulously detailed notes, photographs, and connection diagrams. "I started mapping the network, every corrupt officer, every case they buried, every criminal they protected. The Veterans Day robbery wasn't random. It was their biggest operation yet. And I knew they would need all their corrupt officers in place to pull it off." Rivera studied the notebook with growing understanding. "Your motorcycle route through Cedar Falls was carefully planned," Wynn finished. "I knew Pritchard and Vance would be watching that intersection. Their pattern was always the same: use traffic stops to control who moved through their territory during operations." Agent Chen spread out surveillance photos from Wynn's notebook. "You documented everything: the meetings, the payoffs, the pattern of criminal activities they protected." "The emergency beacon was my insurance policy," Wynn explained. "I knew they would try to stop me, probably violently. But I also knew Marcus would recognize my signal and respond with overwhelming force." Rivera shook his head in amazement. "You used their own prejudices against them? They saw an older black man on a motorcycle and assumed you were an easy target." "They never imagined I was a Marine colonel with a Medal of Honor," Wynn said quietly, "or that I had spent months building a case against their entire network." Agent Chen pulled out another document. "The FBI has been trying to crack this corruption ring for years, but we could never get enough evidence. Your investigation filled in all the missing pieces." "Grief can destroy you," Wynn said, his voice thick with emotion. "Or it can focus you. After Rebecca died, I had two choices: let the pain consume me, or channel it into something meaningful." Rivera reached over and squeezed Wynn's shoulder. "You chose to fight just like you always have." "The network is falling apart," Agent Chen reported. "Pritchard is cooperating with prosecutors. He's naming everyone involved, including the officials who covered up your daughter's case. 32 arrests so far and more coming. Wynn closed his notebook gently. Rebecca was always fighting for justice. She would have wanted me to keep fighting too, just in a different way. Your daughter would be proud, Rivera said softly. You turned personal tragedy into justice for an entire community. Agent Chen gathered the files. Colonel Blackwood, your investigation did more than expose corruption. You've given us the evidence to reform the entire system. The changes coming from this case will protect families for years to come. Wynn stood by the window, looking out at Cedar Falls. The town seemed different now, lighter somehow, as if a heavy shadow had been lifted. His grief would never fully fade, but it had been transformed into something powerful. A force for change, a path to justice, a way to honor Rebecca's memory through service to others. Sometimes, Wynn said quietly, the best way to heal is to help others find healing too. The federal courthouse in Cedar Falls hummed with tension as Wynn took his seat in the gallery. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. General Rivera sat beside him, both men in their formal Marine dress uniforms, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Sergeant Dale Pritchard and 6 other defendants shuffled into the courtroom in orange jumpsuits, their hands and feet shackled. Pritchard's usual swagger had vanished, replaced by the haunted look of a man facing the consequences of his actions. His eyes briefly met Wynn's before darting away, unable to hold the steady gaze of the man he had wrongly attacked. The judge entered, and the courtroom rose. United States versus Pritchard et al., case number 2023-412, the clerk announced. Federal charges of corruption, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. Wynn listened as the prosecution presented their evidence. Years of systematic corruption, racial profiling, and abuse of power. His meticulous investigation formed the backbone of the case. Each piece of evidence, another nail in the coffin of the corrupt network that had protected his daughter's killer. When it was time for victim impact statements, Wynn stood tall despite the lingering effects of Pritchard's taser attack. He approached the podium with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through combat and loss. My daughter Rebecca believed in justice, Wynn began, his voice steady and clear. She was a public defender who fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. When a drunk driver took her life, the system she believed in failed her. The same corruption that allowed her killer to walk free continued to harm this community for years. Wynn turned to face the defendants. But today isn't about vengeance. It's about accountability and change. Every officer who betrays their oath damages the trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. That trust can only be rebuilt through justice and truth. The judge's sentence was swift and severe, 20 years for Pritchard, similar terms for his co-conspirators. As the defendants were led away, Wynn felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had transformed his grief into action, his pain into purpose. After the courtroom cleared, General Rivera approached Wynn in the courthouse lobby. "You've done something remarkable here, sir," Rivera said, "but I hope you're not planning to ride off into the sunset just yet." Wynn raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind, Marcus?" "Fort Braxton needs someone to lead our advanced leadership training program," Rivera explained. "Someone who can teach young Marines about more than just tactics, someone who can show them what real moral courage looks like." Wynn was quiet for a moment, considering. "You think they'd listen to an old warhorse like me?" "They've already heard about what you did here," Rivera smiled. "How you faced down corruption with nothing but truth and courage. That's the kind of leadership they need to learn." 2 weeks later, Wynn stood before a class of 30 young Marines at Fort Braxton. Their eager faces reminded him of Rebecca's passion for teaching others. He saw in them the same potential for positive change that his daughter had always believed in. "Leadership isn't just about giving orders," Wynn began, his voice carrying the weight of experience. It's about standing up for what's right, especially when it's difficult. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. And sometimes it's about transforming personal loss into something that helps others. As he looked at these future leaders, Wynne felt a deep sense of peace. He had honored Rebecca's memory not just by exposing corruption, but by continuing her work of building a more just world. His grief would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become the foundation for a new chapter of service. The young Marines leaned forward, absorbing every word as Wynne shared lessons learned through decades of service and sacrifice. In their faces, he saw the future, a future where moral courage and integrity would guide the next generation of warriors. His daughter's spirit lived on in every life he touched, every leader he helped shape. If this one resonated with you, stick around. I've got another story waiting for you tomorrow, and who knows, it might be just what you needed to hear.